Everyone was on board. That's what the boat told a towing dispatcher at 4:31 in the afternoon on July 4th. What that call didn't mention is that the same boat was going to leave the dock 2 more times before midnight. For 13 days, this case has run on memory. Somebody's recollection of a conversation, somebody's account of who said what on a beach, every version colliding with the next one, and no way to prove which one was right. That changed this week. Investigators didn't get a new witness. They got a machine's word for it. GPS coordinates, time-stamped, automatic, with no opinion about who's telling the truth. And what that data shows is a boat that came home from Horn Island at 4:31 p.m. on July 4th, and then went back out. Twice. For reasons nobody, not the family, not the sheriff, not a single one of the 60-plus witnesses interviewed so far has explained on the record. If you've been following this case, you already know who Nolan Wells was. You already know he never came home from that island. What you're about to get is the update. The hard data that just landed. What the family did about it this week. And one walked-back claim that's been quietly correcting itself in the background while everyone was looking somewhere else. Quick housekeeping before we move. Because this case has already been damaged once by unverified claims spreading faster than corrections could catch up. So I'm not adding to that pile. Everything you're about to hear is sourced directly to CBS News, ABC News, Locks, Mississippi Today, or on-the-record statements from the family, their attorneys, or law enforcement. Where something is still a claim and not a confirmed fact, I'll tell you that explicitly, every single time. And if you've watched our earlier coverage, you already know the drill. But if you're new here, hit subscribe now, before you get pulled into what's coming, because we're staying on this story until there's an answer. Tap like if you want more people asking the same questions to actually find this video, and drop a comment when you're done. Not with wild accusations against real people, just your honest read on what that second boat trip means. Some of the sharpest theories on this entire case have come from this comment section, not from cable news. Okay, let's get into what actually happened this week. Quick recap of the baseline, because everything else this week builds on it. CBS News obtained GPS data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources tracking the boat that carried Nolan to Horn Island on July 4th. That data confirms the boat left a private dock at approximately 9:56 a.m. and arrived at the island at 11:14 a.m. Nolan was last seen there around 3 p.m. The boat left the island at 4:31 p.m. Without him, that 4:31 timestamp lines up closely with what's already been publicly stated by Judge Ashley Cole, whose stepson was on the boat, that the group left early because the boat was taking on water. On July 16th, ABC released audio from that afternoon of one of the teens calling a private towing company, saying the boat was sinking. That's the clip you heard at the top of this video. So the GPS data does something useful right out of the gate. It gives independent, mechanical confirmation to one specific piece of a story that's otherwise been built entirely on people's memories. That's meaningful. It doesn't resolve why Nolan wasn't on that boat. It just confirms the boat itself really did leave around the time everyone said it did. But that's not the part of the data that's new. This is. According to that same GPS data, after the boat returned to its home dock following the 4:31 p.m. departure from Horn Island, it didn't stay there. At 5:52 p.m., it went out again, into Fort Bayou, a real, navigable waterway in the area. It came back to the dock 14 minutes later, at 6:06 p.m. Then, later that evening, at 7:19 p.m., the boat went to the Fort Bayou boat launch, was pulled out of the water, and traveled overland, presumably towed by a vehicle, to the residence of the boat's owners in Biloxi. Sit with that sequence. Boat returns around 4:30. About 90 minutes later, it's back out for a quick round trip. About an hour after, it's at a boat launch getting trailered home for the night. Nobody has explained this. Not Judge Cole's public statement. Not any account from Nolan's friends. Not a single press conference from either side. As of this recording, It is a documented, time-stamped movement of that boat, with no public explanation attached to it at all. Let's be fair about this, because being fair is the whole point of doing this the right way instead of the clickbait way. There are entirely innocent explanations available. Boats need fuel. Equipment gets forgotten and has to be retrieved. If that bilge pump issue was genuinely serious, a short trip might have been needed to check on repairs, or to move the boat somewhere it could be worked on before being trailered home for the night. None of that is inherently suspicious on its face. But innocent explanations aren't the same as confirmed ones. And in a case already defined by a missing phone, messages the family believes were deleted, and a search that didn't formally start for hours, a fresh, unaddressed gap in the boat's own movements is exactly the kind of detail that deserves a direct, on-the-record answer. Who was on that boat during those 2 extra trips? Was it just the owner? Did either trip have anything to do with Nolan? Or was it a completely separate errand that happened to fall on the same evening he was still missing? Right now, the public record doesn't say. And that's precisely why this piece of evidence is different in kind from everything else in this case, not just in degree. GPS data doesn't rely on anyone's memory or anyone's willingness to come forward and tell the truth. It's a mechanical record, generated automatically, that exists independent of what anyone later chooses to say about that day. That doesn't make it perfect evidence. It tells you where a boat was, not who was on it or why a trip happened. We genuinely don't know, from this data alone, who was aboard for that second and third movement. But here's what it does. It gives this investigation, for the first time, a fixed, objective skeleton that every witness account now has to be measured against. If somebody's story doesn't match what the GPS shows, that's no longer one person's word against another's. It's a documented fact sitting there that any account either fits or it doesn't. Think about what that changes practically. Before this data surfaced, virtually any question about that evening could be met with a shrug, or, "I don't remember clearly." Now there's a specific set of timestamps, 5:52, 6:06, 7:19, that whoever was involved will eventually have to account for. To investigators, to a grand jury if it gets there, or simply to the public record, because this case isn't going away quietly. If laying this timeline out this clearly is actually helping you follow the case, that's the entire point of this channel. Hit that like button right now. Genuinely, it takes 2 seconds, and it's the single biggest thing that gets a video like this in front of more people who are asking the exact same questions you are. There's one more layer to this. Sheriff John Ledbetter confirmed on July 15th that the FBI has been assisting his office with examining digital evidence collected so far. He noted that's not unusual, since Horn Island sits on federal land, and the sheriff's office regularly works with the FBI. The FBI itself told ABC News it's working to address interstate threats that were received by individuals related to this matter, without naming who received them, though Judge Cole and Trayston Shepard have both said publicly they've received threats. Ledbetter also confirmed that more than 60 witnesses have now been interviewed, including the 3 friends who were on the boat with Nolan that day. That's the scale of this now. 60+ interviews, federal digital forensics support, and now, a boat with a gap in its story that nobody's addressed. The other major development this week happened away from the water entirely. On Wednesday, July 15th, Nolan's parents sat down for the first time since his body was found with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath and members of her team. Attorney Ben Crump, alongside Attorney Eric Hertz, who's leading the family's independent investigation, described the meeting as respectful. The central outcome: once the sheriff's office finishes its investigation, the case will be turned over to a grand jury. I want to be precise here, because I've seen this detail get flattened into something scarier than it actually is. A grand jury referral is standard procedure in Jackson County for any unnatural or suspicious death. On its own, it does not mean criminal charges are coming. Kilrath's office has said as much directly. Authorities haven't indicated this is being treated as a criminal investigation at this stage, and the DA herself has said she doesn't want to rush to judgment or speculate, while stressing the case remains a priority for her office. Crump described the tone as candid on both sides. He said he pushed for a zealous investigation and that Nolan's parents shared their own perspective with McElrath directly, their belief that people in the South are sometimes investigated differently depending on who they are. He framed that as an attempt at mutual understanding, not a demand. One genuinely concrete outcome came out of this meeting. Both sides agreed to a mutual inspection of Nolan's phone. The family's own experts and the DA's team will examine the device together, at the same time, so both sides see exactly the same data, extracted the same way, no separate exams, no later disputes over whether something was altered. Eric Hertz, working alongside former law enforcement experts, is helping lead that process. Why does that arrangement matter so much? Because when digital evidence gets examined separately by two sides before anyone agrees on shared access, disputes almost always follow, over chain of custody, over whether anything was altered, over whose findings can be trusted. A joint, simultaneous inspection sidesteps nearly all of that. For a case that's already generated this much dispute over one piece of evidence, the phone, and what may or may not have been deleted from it, that kind of procedural clarity is genuinely valuable, no matter what the phone ultimately reveals. Hertz also raised something procedural, but real. He told reporters that under Mississippi law, crime victims are entitled to receive an incident report within roughly 72 hours, and that window had already passed. Part of Wednesday's meeting was about actually obtaining that report, along with basic information the family felt they should already have had. And this next detail is worth sitting with.
Christine Wansley said the DA's office is now taking over primary communication with the family going forward, in part because they have a dedicated victim advocate on staff. She said she appreciated that. But she was honest about how things had been up to that point. The last time anyone from the sheriff's department had actually communicated with her, she said, was the previous Tuesday. And even that was only a text message.
She had sent, simply asking for an update. Sit with that for a second. This is a case that's drawn a nationally known civil rights attorney, celebrity funding, sustained national media coverage, and by the mother's own account, the actual line of communication between her and the lead investigating agency had, for over a week, gone essentially quiet except for one text she initiated herself. We're 20 minutes in. If you're still here, you're exactly who this channel is built for. Someone who wants the actual sourced facts, not just the 5 most dramatic seconds of a press conference clipped out of context. So here's my ask. Right in the middle of this video, not at the end. If this is genuinely a clearer breakdown of this case than anywhere else you've seen it, subscribe right now. Mid-video subscribes are what actually keep a channel like this able to do deep, sourced updates instead of quick reaction content. And while you're at it, comment below. What do you think that second boat trip was? I want to see your read on it. Now let's talk about a correction that matters more than it's been getting credit for. At an earlier press conference, Crump described a video circulating from Horn Island and said Nolan could be heard on it shouting for his phone back. He quoted the line directly, and when asked how his team knew it was Nolan's voice, said multiple witnesses had identified it as his. Since then, that claim has been directly disputed. On July 13th, Trayston Shepard, a friend of Nolan's who says he was on Horn Island that day, told ABC News on Good Morning America that it was actually his own voice on the recording, not Nolan's, and that the yelling came from a completely separate altercation that had nothing to do with Nolan. At Wednesday's press conference, a reporter asked Crump about this directly. His answer this time was noticeably more careful than the original claim. He said, essentially, that's what a witness told his team, and that's what they reported at the time. And since then, another witness has come forward disputing it. He said his team now has people working to determine, definitively, whose voice is actually on the recording, and that going forward, they'll be more careful to specify when a claim is coming from a witness rather than presenting it as confirmed. Here's why this matters more than it might seem. That specific claim, Nolan's voice, demanding his phone back, was one of the most emotionally powerful details in the entire case for weeks. It was repeated at press conferences, picked up by commentators, treated by a huge portion of the public as effectively settled fact. Hearing Crump himself now describe it as unresolved and directly disputed by a named witness doesn't mean nothing happened in that video. But it does mean the specific claim that anchored so much public suspicion may not hold up the way it was originally presented. And that's a correction worth carrying into how the rest of this case gets discussed, including by every channel covering it, this one included. If this is the first time you're hearing that walkback explained clearly, that's exactly the kind of detail that gets buried under louder, more sensational content. It's also exactly why I'd rather get a video out a little slower and get it right, than rush something out I'd have to quietly correct later.
Alongside everything else, the family has now confirmed how they'll lay Nolan to rest. The service will be held
Monday, July 20th. At Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs, visitation runs from 9 to 11 a.m., with the funeral immediately after. Christine has been direct about the tone she wants. He would not want us to be sitting around crying. A repass, deliberately framed as a celebration rather than a traditional gathering, follows at the Jackson County Fairgrounds, and media will be permitted there too. Former teammates from middle school, high school, and college are specifically being included, alongside Nolan's coaches, past and present. Christine has also asked, clearly and more than once, that if anyone plans to protest, including on the day of the funeral itself, it stays peaceful. Nolan would never want any type of violence, she said. A few people have stepped up to help carry this. Filmmaker Tyler Perry is covering the cost of the funeral. Former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick is funding the independent autopsy. Reverend Al Sharpton has agreed to officiate. Christine has thanked local officials who've been checking in regularly and has asked that anyone who can't contribute to the family's GoFundMe simply keep them in prayer instead.
There's something worth naming about the decision to open even the funeral to media, rather than retreating into total privacy at the exact moment most grieving families would want it most.
It's the same instinct that's shaped this entire case from day one. This family has consistently chosen visibility over privacy, even when it's cost them. Harassment, AI-generated fake videos targeting Christine directly, constant public scrutiny of their son's final hours. Crump has called that fabricated content god-awful and said nobody's life should be threatened in the pursuit of the truth. Whatever you think about any other part of this case, that's a family that has decided their best shot at real answers is staying loud, not staying quiet. Let's pull this back together, because there's a lot of new material here, and I don't want the details to bury the shape of the update. We now have a documented, time-stamped GPS record confirming the broad outline of the July 4th departure timeline, while introducing a brand new, still unexplained second and third movement of the boat that evening. We have federal digital forensics assistance confirmed as part of the investigation, and more than 60 witnesses interviewed. We have a formal process now moving toward a grand jury, standard procedure, not confirmation of a crime, alongside a fully independent, family-funded investigation, with a joint phone examination now scheduled between both sides. We have a real, on-the-record walkback of one of this case's most emotionally powerful early claims, the video, and whose voice is actually on it. And we have a funeral, now scheduled for Monday, July 20th, that this family has chosen to frame as a celebration, even while they keep fighting, on two fronts at once, for the truth. Here's what none of this tells us yet: what actually happened to Nolan Wells between 3 o'clock that afternoon and the moment he ended up in the water. It doesn't confirm or deny anything about the deleted messages, or the disputed conversation with the girl he reportedly stayed behind to talk to. What it gives us is this case's first genuinely hard, unimpeachable data point, and one new documented thread that deserves real follow-up. Who was on that boat for its second and third trips that night, and why? We are going to stay on this story as that Fort Bayou trip gets addressed, if it gets addressed, as the joint phone examination moves forward, as both autopsy results finally come in, as this case moves toward a grand jury. We'll bring you what's actually confirmed, sourced, and verified. Not the fastest version of the story, the accurate one. If this update gave you a clearer picture than anything else you've watched on this case, that's exactly what this channel is for. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Like this video so it reaches more people asking the same questions you had before you clicked play. And drop a comment telling me what you think that unexplained boat trip was or what you want us to dig into next. I read every one, and they genuinely shape what we cover. Thank you for watching all the way through. We'll see you in the next update.